Thank you for tuning in to the 6th episode of the Justice Beat's 4th season. Today's topic is disability in prisons. Sanjay Smith is a native wheelchair user with quadriplegia. He founded CRIP Justice, which advocates and educates on law enforcement violence against people with disabilities. Sanjay believes everyone is entitled to justice. The Disability Rights Washington Protections and Advocacy System is a private nonprofit organization that protects the rights of people with disabilities statewide. Our mission is to advance the dignity, equality, and self-determination of people with disabilities. We work to pursue justice on matters related to human and legal rights.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 5th installment of the Justice Beat Talk Show. My name is Taylor Dalton. I'm one of the associate producers here. Super excited to welcome Sanjay Smith here with me and Heather Mckimmie as well. Welcome to our listening and viewing audience on all social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again, Heather and Sanjay. Welcome to the Justice Beat Talk Show. Not sure where you are, but good morning here from Chicagoland. So I just want to dive right in here. I know we are starting a little bit late here. However, we're super excited to have you both. I just want to start off first with Sanjay. I wanted to ask specifically, why did you start CRIP Justice? And can you tell us about why you chose that name specifically?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Sanjay, the founder of CRIP Justice. I have my own experience with policing. And so I noticed that the issues of police violence against disability. But when I noticed in society, and so I created this to document these issues.
My name is Sanjay Smith, the founder of CRIP Justice. I had my own negative experiences with policing, but I also started to notice that the issues of police violence against people with disabilities was really going unnoticed. So I started documenting police violence against people with disabilities.
Wow. Well, that kind of segues me right into another question. Can you talk a little bit about what would be good alternatives to policing in consideration of this community?
Okay. People tend to think that we need to have a professional, but in my favorite approach, we need to somebody more suited to deal with this situation. But after the case, it is far more helpful if you have somebody in the community to address this.
There's often the tendency to think you always need a professional or someone with a degree to handle someone with a disability, because there's a tendency to see disability as a crisis, right, or as an exception, rather than thinking of people with disabilities as a part of the community. And really, it's the communities that are often the best first responders. So equipping communities to handle crises is often the first best way to address mental health crises or other crises faced by people with disabilities.
I mean, that's a great way That's a great way to even move away from the model of policing in and of itself into this community support, right? I have another question here, asking about the wide variety of forms that policing people with disabilities can take. And I think you're touching on this. And if you want to expand further, how these forms are harmful. I think this is huge, this idea that it's like, it doesn't take a professional, a trained professional, but someone who has the lived experience. So are there other kind of examples that you can give, especially our listening and viewing audience that might not be aware of these issues, specifically how these forms can be harmful within policing of people with disabilities?
Yeah. And presentation the community rights people and government divided the program and county system.
Yeah, one of the issues is that there's many other forms of policing, and kind of the alternative is often seen as calling social workers, but social workers can be equally policing and not respect the autonomy of people with disabilities.
Wow, I think that's huge to hear and to understand, right? That even within the field of counseling, mental health care, et cetera, that we're still seeing a void there. I would love to kind of jump over to Heather and the work that you do, and speaking specifically about from your experience, what kind of issues do prisoners with disabilities face in light of that?
Oh, yeah, so many. I think that that idea that maybe replacing police with social workers can come with all kinds of issues is kind of a big one. When people are in prison, I mean, I think if you just kind of back up, like people who have been incarcerated, a really high percentage of them have disabilities. Either they're coming in with disabilities of all kinds, or they may acquire them as they're in prison. Because of inadequate health care, or mental health conditions have been worsened while dealing with the conditions there. So I think it's just really important to talk about that. Such a huge percentage of people in prison have some type of disability. And I think then you have to talk about the intersecting identities that everybody has too. So you have people are holding their racial identities, ethnicity, sexual orientation, their gender identity, their religion, their age, and all of that can compound and make their experience unique. And so those are the types of things that we are trying to address. I think the main issues that we hear about are healthcare related. Mm-hmm. So if people have to go to prison, if that's what our society is set up now, people are going to prison. Prison could be seen as a place where healthcare needs could be actually addressed. Maybe right. That you weren't able to address in the community. Let's get you back on your feet, or get you back toward health, whatever that looks like for you, and really get that going. But when healthcare is so abysmal inside prisons, folks are not getting healthier while they're there, and in fact are usually getting less healthy. I was thinking earlier, if you could name a healthcare condition that someone has, I can probably give you a horror story related to how that was being treated. Something as simple as allergies. Mm-hmm. Just if ignored, can be totally devastating while you're in custody. So that is a lot of what we work on. And connected to that is lack of access to mental health care. Sure. Folks come in, aren't believed when they say they have symptoms, or PTSD. It's not schizophrenia, so maybe we don't really have good counseling for that, or medication that will help you. So we're not really going to assist you with that. And I think if you have a behavioral disorder while you're in prison, mental health might say that's not really our issue. Just get your behavior together, and we're not going to help get you treatment, but you might end up in solitary confinement instead. So a lot of our work, things are related to how people get into solitary confinement. What is their access to health care? And I think the other big bucket of things that people with disabilities experience in prison have to do with like access. So if someone uses a wheelchair, can they even get into their cell?
Right.
They leave their wheelchair outside and they maybe have to somehow get up on the floor to get to their bed, things like that. Can someone who uses a wheelchair or other type of mobility device get to a program? Is the pathway paved such that they can even move through the area to get to where they need to go? And other simple things like if you're in the community and you have diabetes, you have control over generally what kind of foods you might eat for your health. While you're in prison, you don't have that control. You have to ask for certain special diets. So access to food that's appropriate for you, or shoes, if you have special shoes you need, how do you get those? How do you access accommodations in education and employment? If you need a note taker, for instance, is the school going to give you that note taker? And then I think the other big one is access to communication. So if you need hearing aids, if you use American Sign Language to communicate, you have an interpreter, all those types of issues. So I think those basically cover a lot of the main issues that we see in prisons.
Yeah, and I want to dive into the work that you do specifically, but I think you bring up such a good point in that everything that you're talking about exists, of course, in the world outside of prisons, and so we're just furthering our accessibility because of the healthcare scarcity, truly, right? That's available to prisoners specifically in any population already. So we're furthering that. I think you brought up a really interesting point, though, about how entering into prison is its own specific kind of trauma, right? That only a certain number within the population ever will experience. And how, sure, there are certain people coming into prison knowing about their disability, but you brought up and mentioned the fact that, like, through the trauma of entrance into prison, there might be some disability brought to light there, and how there's even further access within that conversation of like whether or not that is something one can advocate for themselves, if they can even just name on their own, and the fact that our criminal justice system isn't prepared for the people that already know about what they're coming in with and what they face and the accommodations that they need and are used to, let alone someone understanding more about themselves in prison through the trauma of that experience, being like, this is something that I am now facing and I am not receiving adequate assistance, help within that. And I feel like that is so overlooked, and the opportunity for that to just kind of grow and be fostered there. But talk to me more about the work that you do. What is the AVID program, AVID, for those listening and viewing?
So I work for Disability Rights Washington State, so we're on the West Coast. And the AVID program stands for Amplifying Voices of Incarcerated Individuals with Disabilities. And so our program is it's a small team. There are 4 lawyers, and we cover all the prisons and the jails and what is called the Special Commitment Center in our state. It's a civil commitment center for people who have been deemed sexually violent predators. So even though it's not a prison or a jail, it basically functions like one, if not worse in some ways. And so we kind of cover that under our parameter. And we have special access authority that the federal government has given us that allows us to go into places where people with disabilities live and receive services. So for our team, that means we can go into prisons and jails and other facilities and go into the places where people usually can't go. So we can go into solitary confinement, we can go into suicide watch, and we can go into medical isolation areas and really talk to folks about what's going on, and then try to amplify what they're asking for and what they need out. So we can make videos, we can bring in our cameras. So we make videos to expose what's happening. We write reports. We talk to the administration of the facilities, bringing the concerns of people to them and the solutions that they want to, right? It has to be, we're trying to be led by the people who are experiencing these things. And so that's the amplification part. And not all agencies like ours, every state and territory has an agency like ours, really focuses their work in prisons and jails. We think that kind of the forefront of disability rights and disability justice is looking at who are those people with disabilities who are most impacted by how our society is set up. And so that's why our team is really thinks this is really important. And we do all types of things. So we investigate. If we hear of abuse or neglect or see it, we can get records really quickly, which is one of our other kind of, I guess, superpowers. So so if someone tells us something happens, we can go to the prison and say, we want to see all the records related to this person. We need them within 3 days. If you're an outside lawyer using the Public Records Act, or anybody using the Public Records Act, that can take months to get records. And by then, who knows what has happened. So we can get records really quickly and verify things and advocate. We can monitor, so we can go out to the facilities, talk to folks, see what's going on. We can make videos. We do some individual representation. Like if somebody's in solitary and it doesn't, like what is going on here, we can advocate for that. And then we try to make system change too. So if a bunch of people are complaining about something, that's usually when we try to get a policy change, do some kind of negotiation. And we can sue if we need to. We take it really seriously. Our decisions to file lawsuits, it's a big use of resources. It takes us away from other types of advocacy. And sometimes they have limited success. So we find we can get a lot more movement if we can get the prisons to come to our side and just work with us. We can get a lot more creative on solutions, but we do sue sometimes. And then we also do legislative advocacy. So for instance, we really want to ban solitary in our state. It's just an awful, torturous practice. And so we work on bills like that, and also things that will get people out of prison. How can we shorten sentences? How can we really decarcerate and move toward shrinking prisons, getting rid of them altogether?
Got it. Amazing. Sounds like amazing work. Talk to me about how the P&A system works.
So yeah, Disability Rights Washington is part of the P&A system, which stands for Protection and Advocacy. That's where, so the federal government, in response to some really horrific abuse of people with disabilities in institutions in the 70s, created these laws to create entities that can help investigate and address abuse and neglect. And so we're one of those. If you have an agency in your state called Disability Rights something, they're one of us, but they have different names. And so again, we work with all people with all types of disabilities. So, intellectual, developmental disabilities, physical mobility disabilities, if you're deaf or hard of hearing, brain injury, learning disabilities. So really, and again, like I was talking about earlier, it really can encompass so many people. And at any point, someone can get a disability in their life. So we basically, so we have those special powers where we can monitor and go inside facilities, get our records. That's what makes us really unique. And then we, as a system, we can work together. So I hear like Disability Rights California has filed a lawsuit. We can connect with them, share information, share stories. We have a network that can really, we can build off each other's ideas, which is really great. And there's several across the country that do work around prison issues. So we communicate with them pretty regularly.
Amazing. So to clarify, so the DRW specifically is part, and all of the statewide kind of programming is part of the P&A network, right?
Right.
Okay. Very cool. I mean, it's amazing work. And I want to jump back to Sanjay here as far as like, we're talking about a lot of the voids that are trying to be filled, right, within the criminal justice system, and the fact that it oftentimes fails this specific community. So talk to me, Sanjay, about your disabled and punished defense campaigns and the work that you're doing there.
I think that campaigns that support people with disabilities that have been impacted by police violence. That's our so there's a hospital that they help us. But currently, but currently, David, Riverside, that he's been suicidal, and then and then just like,
Yes, the Disabled and Punished campaign is part of CRIP Justice. That was part of the larger conversation on the need to free everyone who is being faced with incarceration. So that included not just jails and prisons, but psychiatric institutions, hospitals, etc. So CRIP Justice started supporting and developing defense campaigns for people with disabilities subject to various kinds of incarceration. And one case in particular that we're working on now is Derek Schaaf in Riverside County. His mom called at 911 requesting mental health support for him when he was suicidal, but instead of providing support, they decided to incarcerate him and charge him so that he would overcharge him so that he would be facing a life sentence. And of course, he's getting no mental health care at all while he's in jail. So we're trying to call for his release. But on our website, if you look at the tab Disabled and Punished, there's a campaign for many other people with disabilities who are being incarcerated and who need support. And sometimes there's not a legal answer. So that's why we need to organize and provide advocacy, letter writing, petition drives, whatever we can do to release people with disabilities who are being incarcerated.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, especially in light of this conversation and what it is, even just opening my own understanding of the system and the ways that it fails, we know that it fails everyone. And the fact that it has further impacts on certain communities more than others. And the fact that the work that both of you are doing, Heather and Sanjay, is so necessary. And I'm wondering about, one, how your organizations work together in order to bring access, in order to bring representation. I know we're talking about kind of the legal side of things and then the advocacy side of things that are tangential, that are working hand in hand with each other. And I'm also wondering about the ways in which communities can support both of the work that you're doing. Like, how can people, get involved is like such a, I don't mean to make that sound like a buzz kind of topic. But in order to support the work that you're doing, what can be done from a community level?
Organization to make system like 911 or the expected coalition stuff.
So we work in collaboration with legal groups. So for instance, we work with the Disability Justice Law and Organizing Project. So if they have a case where there's not a clear legal remedy, they refer folks to CRIP Justice that can help provide advocacy and organizing support. And we also work with community-based groups like Riverside Cat 911, for instance, which is focused on creating community-based rapid response systems and also education on a neighbor-to-neighbor basis so people know how to respond to crisis that respects the autonomy of people with disabilities. So we collaborate together, provide co-education so that we can have a comprehensive approach to supporting the needs of people with disabilities.
Great. That system of like interconnected work, right, is there to support you, because that's so important. Heather, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think we have on the policing aspect, it's not really part of my main job, but I know in our policing work at Disability Rights Washington, there's a lot of connection to different communities that have experienced really horrific loss, to work together with organizations like the ACLU of Washington and Disability Rights Washington and a bunch of organizations to try to push reform in our policing system. So we do have community connections for that. I think in the prison work, sometimes the community, I view our community as people who are incarcerated. And so sometimes organize that, having that with, especially in solitary confinement, let's say, that's our big issue. That's a really hard issue for people to organize around inside. You were in solitary confinement.
Right.
And so we struggle with, like, we know how to get input from folks, but having like an organized community that we can really like get direction from is difficult. And also there's been some complications around that in the community. It's not necessarily the community's top priority. So we work with community, other criminal legal system reform issues that we work on with them in coalitions and things like that, which works really well. And then I think we get a lot of our input from incarcerated folks by us going in, sending in surveys, being like, what are the things you really want us to work on? And as we're working on a bill, what is working with you and what is not working? What do you think will, so it's interesting when you're working with people inside, but there are groups of folks that are organized that they're just not necessarily identifying as having a disability that we still work with. There's some barriers, I think, but we're really trying to work through those to make sure it's community led and have a lot of community input.
Yeah. I mean, I think you are also both of you are touching on the ways in which we have to look at the entire political economy of this issue, where it's like, sure, we're talking about a specific population, we're talking about the criminal justice system as a whole, but the ways in which we're looking at policing in general, we're looking at the ways in which redlining, the ways in which food insecurity, like this is an issue that it just grows off of so many other institutional issues that are out in society. So that, again, it kind of funnels back into this idea that, like, past a prison or a jail's doors, we're furthering accessibility there for this population. And we're gonna hop into a Q&A and check in on all of our social media platforms in a few minutes here. But as far as, like, for both of you, is there anything that you feel that we haven't covered in the questions that I've been able to ask today that you would want the kind of general population to know about this, about the issues that prisoners with disabilities face, or just the fact that more light needs to be shed on this issue? Is there anything that comes to mind that you're like, this is very pressing, that this information is known? Anything that you have to add there?
I've got some ideas, but I can wait too. You've got some.
Yeah, Sanjay.
Many people that say that the system has to fight about the my question, my system to be clear and a mental health support
So kind of relate to what you were saying, that many people in jail with disabilities are there because their social support system was defunded. One person, Crip Justice is supporting, for instance, was determined to be cured and lost all his mental health support because the county was defunding those systems. So he had an episode and now he's been in jail for over a year. But meanwhile, the same county, Orange County, has decided to spend $350 million to create a mental health jail. Literally, it's called a mental health jail, rather than actually provide support for people. So it does need, we do need a comprehensive approach that addresses all the issues that you've been mentioning, because policing is part of a larger system of injustice. But also, in our experience, that there are many people in jails with disabilities are in fact organizing. They just need support to get their voices heard. So that's what we are trying to do.
Amazing. Yeah, that's so important. That's a huge, how jarring that term is, a mental health jail. How like that doesn't seem like a solution in any way, in order to like other and further a group of people from quote unquote normalized society, which in and of itself is a problematic term, or a problematic idea that there are others in our society. Heather, do you have anything to add as far as what you would want kind of the general population to know?
Yeah, I think we're having some like internal, and I think the disability rights movement is having some internal awakenings.
Sure.
That disability rights is really a white-led movement that is focused on historically has been focused on like legal rights. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, and like if we can just litigate and solve these things without really getting to the underlying discrimination and ableism that is just in our society as a whole. And so I think that and hasn't really looked at people as whole people. That just looked at, it's just like focus on the disability aspect, but what about all these other parts of people's identity? And so there's a disability justice movement that kind of came out of disabled queer folks and activists of color who have come up with these 10 principles that we are really trying to be more engaged with and learn about, and have our advocacy focus toward disability justice, which involves intersectionality and leadership of the most impacted, and a long list of principles. And that has really helped us focus our work, not so much, well, we do need to address some conditions that are happening in the prison. Mm-hmm. It's not, we don't want to work to expand these systems. So we don't want to have a mental health jail. We don't want to make, we want people out of these systems and having community-based supports. And so I think some of our work has changed. We have to kind of clean up some old work that maybe wasn't in line with this, but we can be creative about how we continue that work. So that's been interesting. But like, for instance, we are working a lot with the transgender population and non-binary populations in prison, which I think we were a little hesitant to step into because we don't think being trans is a disability. But this population in prison needed so much assistance. There was so much harm being done to this population. They weren't getting access to healthcare, surgeries, not being housed in the correct facilities, and their sexual assault, all types of things are happening to this pretty small population in our prison. And so many of those folks, just like anybody else in prison, they have disabilities. They have mental health conditions, maybe based on their lack of access to healthcare. And there's, over incarceration of trans folks who are Black. And there's all these intersections of things going on. So who's the most impacted really to us was like, who had disabilities, was a small group of trans folks who were really being harmed. And I think like 10 years ago, that wouldn't necessarily be where we focused. We would think, well, that's kind of separate. That's not really a disability related issue. And so we have a ton of resources from our small team on this population by working with the most impacted groups. So we know that by helping this group, that will lift up and help. The changes we will make will help everyone. It will help healthcare for everyone because of the things that we're doing for this group. And so I think that's where this movement is moving. And I think a lot of the other PNAs are also grappling with this and trying to figure out how do we help folks inside without expanding, moving toward abolition, but still recognizing that a lot of people are really being harmed and how do we assist them. So that's where we're going.
Right. And how frustratingly slow that process is, especially in this country. We're working against historical systems that are working exactly as they intended to work. And I think you bring up a great point. And Sanjay, you touched on this as well, just the intersectionality that we have to be accountable for, that we have to be responsible for. And I think you're exactly right, Heather, that 10 years ago, we didn't have the language around a lot of these things. We didn't have there were certain issues that weren't brought into kind of the general purview, let's say, that like now are, and there is a need to advocate for that. There is a need to focus kind of to work directly against this scarcity mindset that like, yes, helping the quote unquote least of these, sure, we'll say, we'll talk about the people with the most marginalized intersections, how helping them helps everyone, how helping them helps all of us, and how important that work is. So, I mean, that's an amazing kind of focus that both of your organizations are working towards, because it is important as part of a larger movement, right? You're talking about abolition. We're talking about that there is enough liberation for all of us, to quote Dominique from our last week's talk show. Yeah, I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm going to open up to our associate producers and see if we have any questions for Heather and Sanjay at this point in time. Let's start with YouTube. Nick, do you want to hop on here? Anything from our YouTube viewers? Hey, Nick.
Hey there. We've got nothing on the YouTube front this afternoon, but we have been having a very productive conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's hop over to Vito on Fanbase, I believe.
I'm on Twitter today.
Amazing.
There is no questions on Twitter, but Heather and Sanjay, I really appreciate your time. This has been a really wonderful discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both so much. I'm here on the Zoom chat. I'm not seeing anything coming in because we worked in that one question. But yeah, I just thank you both so much for joining us. We will definitely be putting out in our social media communication links to the work that you both are doing in order to just be a part of this larger community, right? That is working towards access, towards information, towards education and everything that goes along with that. So thank you both so much.